I heard about paint inlays but don't know how to use them? Watch this video and learn how.
I'm Kathy with Goods and Vintage Treasures, and welcome to my channel.
Here's the next project. A little bit of laminate problem. I can fix that.
This piece had a little chip in the laminate. It's easy to fix. I use this wood filler. I like to put it on with gloves and rub it into the indention or the break. And then I like to take my putty knife and smooth it. Once it's dry, I sand it smooth. You never knew it was a chip there. Next step is to clean it thoroughly. I like to use some Dawn in some warm water. Then it's time for paint, and I chose the Luscious DIY Paint in Blue Iris. I like to apply with two brushes. I like this little sampler brush, which you can buy on my website at goodsandvintagetreasures.com. I painted the whole piece one coat of Blue Iris. I also like to use this French tip brush. Unfortunately, I don't have these for sale. It's good to get in those little indentions and cracks in the edges. I also painted the pools with Blue Iris. It was easier though to put the inlay on without them, so I removed them and painted them an extra coat after I removed them. I'm going to be using a paint inlay, and I'm going to put it in this interior little designs that are on this piece. So to do that, I needed a pattern to cut the inlay. I laid a piece of brown packing paper, and I used my pencil to find where the lines were. And I used kind of just a coloring method to find the outline of the piece. Then I traced it, and then I cut the piece out. I traced all those little indentions and designs so that that's where I'm going to put the inlay. And the inlay I'm going to use is called Morocco by Orchid Designs. I sell these on my website, goodsandvintagetreasures.com too. After tracing the design, I cut it out and made sure it fit. Once I was sure it fit, I took the IOD paint inlay called Morocco and cut out the pieces. A paint inlay actually has paint on the paper that you transfer into wet paint. Once I had all the pieces traced and carefully cut out, making sure I cut them out on the right side, the paint side goes down. Once I had them all traced and cut out, then it was time to apply them. To apply a paint inlay, they need to be pressed into wet paint. So again, I took my Blue Iris and I painted another coat of Blue Iris on each design where I was going to apply the paint inlay. I had the paint inlays all cut and ready. Once I had the paint on, you press the paint inlay into the wet paint. Of course, I could have put the inlay of the whole piece, but I just wanted to put it in these designs that were already on the piece. You make sure you put the paint side into the wet paint. You can spray your inlay with a little bit of water to make it a little more flexible. I lined it up carefully. And you have a little bit of freedom with movement when you first place it down. I sprayed this with a little more water to make it a little easier to lay onto the dresser. Have your piece in place, press it down good with your hand. Then you want to either use a wet sponge, here I'm using a wet sponge, or a damp cloth to wet the paint inlay to allow the paint to soak into the wet paint off the inlay and onto the dresser. I also like to use a brayer to make sure it's pressed down tight. You could also use a credit card or something flat like a scrape. But do it gentle because you do not want to tear your paper. Then to continue to paint an area, place your paint inlay down, paint side down, into the wet paint. I sprayed this one again to make it a little more flexible. It was a large piece, so I had to piece the colors, so I matched out the print. Then I moistened with wet sponge, not soaking wet, but damp sponge. And then I used my brayer to flatten it out. Now all this needs to dry, completely dry. I let mine dry overnight. You can use a hairdryer to speed up the process, but it needs to all dry overnight, or at least till it's completely dry. Here I am applying the pieces to the bottom drawer. Mine dried overnight. Once it was dry, completely dry, I took a damp sponge again and moistened the whole piece. You want it wet so that you can pull it off. You can use a sprayer for this, but I didn't want the rest of my paint to get wet along the sides, so I used a sponge. Sponge works great. Once you have the whole piece wet or damp, you'll need to take a corner and pull it off. And let's see how it transferred. Here we go. Voila! And the wonderful thing is, this piece can be used again on another project. It won't be as dark. It can be transferred 2 more times. Each time will be paler. I continue to remove all the other pieces with the same process. Sponge, peel, when the piece is completely dried, it's time to put a finish on it. I use Big Top, half water, half Big Top in a sprayer for the first coat. That keeps it from smearing the paint inlay. Then I paint on the next coat. And the piece is finished. Isn't it gorgeous? You can buy all the products I used here at goodsandvintagetreasures.com. I even put a little piece on the side. Blue Iris is the color from DIY Paint. The inlay is Morocco, and I use Big Top as a sealer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe buttons.